Welcome to AWS Educate on Twitch. This is the beginning of a 4-part series where we first walk into what AWS Educate is, then talk about the building of a static website. We're going to get more dynamic over time. This is actually not our first time with the Twitch audience that we love. We were actually here at the major AWS conference called reInvent in November.
Yep.
That was a blast, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was a ton of fun, whether you're a student or an educator or just a user of AWS. I think there's something for everyone there. And the great thing is, even if you don't come, the videos of all the sessions are posted on YouTube, so you can enjoy them in your own living room if you want.
There's also phenomenal live stream during it as well. So I'm Ken Eisner, the global lead for AWS Educate. AWS Educate is Amazon's global program to provide students and teachers around the world with the resources needed to prepare students for this amazing cloud-enabled world that we'll start talking about. Leo, how about you? Could you give a quick background?
Sure. So my name is Leo Zhadanovsky. I'm a principal solutions architect at Amazon Web Services. And what solutions architect means is I work with our customers to help them with whatever it is they want to do on AWS. So whether they want to close down their data center and move it into AWS, or they want to just move a certain app, or they already have something running and they want to improve their security on it, I help them with all of that kind of stuff. And I've been here for about 5 years. I used to work with education customers, so with universities and companies that build software for education, and I currently work on the international expansion team. Before that, from 2009 to 2013, so in the 2012 re-election cycle, I worked for the Democratic National Committee, and then I was embedded at the Obama re-election campaign in 2012. And so we ended up building about 220 applications in AWS. So it ranged from websites to donation processing to mobile apps. And so that's how I got my start in AWS. That's how I learned how to use it.
That's fantastic. Another thing that I think Leo is super skilled at is making technical things easy, and he's going to put that to use when we build this website today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So can you give us a brief overview of the importance of cloud computing?
Yeah, absolutely. So cloud computing began in 2006 when Amazon Web Services started the Amazon Simple Storage Service, or S3. It actually, technically, in 2004, we introduced the Amazon Simple Queue service, but
SQS,
the real formal beginning was in 2006. Since then, this world of computing has spun up around the cloud. Anything from being a software developer in the cloud to DevOps to cloud architect, like you are, to data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and Internet of Things, that dramatic advanced services that are spinning up around what we're calling the fourth industrial revolution really came because of the cloud. That is leading to this massive demand for cloud computing people, personnel who are adept at using the cloud. Cloud and distributed computing has been the #1 LinkedIn skill for the past 3 years in a row. So employers are showing their signal that they need people who have these skills. In addition, people who have an AWS certification, actually at the associate or the entry professional level, have an average salary of over $100,000 as per Global Knowledge. The problem is that we can't recruit people fast enough. Glassdoor, in a study that they showed over their platform between, I think it was 2009 and 2015, the time to hire for employers increased by 80%. So we're having a much harder time recruiting people with these skills, yet these skills are in high demand and they pay well. So there's just this giant world of potential in cloud computing.
Great. So tell us about AWS Educate and why it was created.
Yeah, so we started AWS Educate. We launched it formally in May of 2015. And it was done to provide students, educators, in educational institutions around the world with the resources that they need in order to provide students with access into these worlds. It's a purely grant-driven program. So students, educators, you can go online at awseducate.com.
Yeah, so let's show my screen here.
Fantastic. So it has a longer URL, but all you really have to remember is awseducate.com. You type that into your browser, it'll get you to this site. On this site, the student and educator can register. They get a series of benefits. Teachers gain access to free and open content, largely because we need those classes to speed the amount of AWS cloud computing, data sciences that they have in their courses so that students are prepared for those careers. It has access to free online professional development. We also do some mass in-person online professional development. And for students, it has access to self-paced pathways in the cloud, access to micro-credentials that they can gain, and access to a job board. So you can get all that, students and educators can get it for free. And by the way, and we'll keep mentioning this as we go through your demo today, but for Twitch students, and use your email domain of your institution, your .edu domain if you have one, when you register at this site, you'll get additional access into AWS because we believe that students really need that practical work experience. Like how much work experience did you come with when you came to AWS hands-on?
Oh, I mean, all of my work experience in terms of AWS was hands-on. When I started using AWS, I didn't know anything about it. And, over the course of helping build those 220-something apps, I learned a lot about AWS. I kind of learned with trial by fire, but it was also super useful. Getting your hands on a keyboard and actually using AWS is, I think, the most effective way to learn how to use it. And you're attaining a skill set that, like you said, is very useful for employers.
Yeah, completely agree. The theoretical backbone of all this is important, but we really need people with hands-on, practical, work-based experience, which again, is why we're going to go into this demo. Every student who registers using the promo code Twitch, TWITCH 2018, no space between those two. When they register, there will be a place to put in your promo code. We'll get $100 worth of access into AWS, either through our AWS account or the starter account, which we'll go into in a second.
So actually, that reminds me, how can a student sign up both with a credit card or even without a credit card?
Absolutely. So when we started, first of all, AWS Educate was just open to students aged 18 or older. So largely people who are in college and universities or postgraduate programs. And we have over 1,500 educational institutions, hundreds of thousands of students, largely who are in that category have joined. We opened it up to students age 14 and older, both for those students who are younger than the age of 18 and don't have a credit card, and for the many students, millions of students around the world who don't have access to a credit card or don't want to use their parents' credit card or whatever. We also have a starter account that does not require a credit card. It's capped and the like, and you'll be able to walk them in. Could we give them a quick display of the Educate portal?
Yeah. So to get to the portal, you'd have to click on this button, right? Join, and then you fill in a form and you apply. And then you have to get approved, right? So how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So you fill in your name, your email address. Again, you want to use the email address of your educational institution, your city, state, very basic information around who you are. Most students, as long as you have an educational institutional domain and you go through our various checks, you will get approved within moments.
So then after you're approved, you get into this portal, right? So walk us through the portal, Ken.
So you're showing the AWS Educate profile, our portfolio. We find this incredibly important. It shows the resume. Leo, I see you uploaded your resume onto the site. Very good. Your basic statistics around the institution that you're going to, any degree that you've obtained. I think you have your degree down there.
I do. And then I linked it to my GitHub and my LinkedIn pages as well.
Perfect. It'll also eventually push up digital credentials. I'll show you that in a sec. The importance of filling out this portfolio is we also have a job board at the end. Amazon customer and partner jobs, internships and full-time jobs are also shown on the site. They link directly to the pathways because these employers are looking for signals that you have the competencies to participate in one of these jobs. So we are about an education to job site. We want to make sure that we're placing people in these jobs and help fill in that big job skill gap. In order to get that, let's show them some of the pathways.
Yep.
So this shows career pathways. That's our, quote unquote, methodology. Students can gain access to be a cloud architect, software development engineer. They can see the skills that are necessary in order to get to these jobs, and then walk over into the portal where they then are able to actually consume content, take knowledge checks, do a final assessment, and do a project, because we want them to get that hands-on experience. Once they do that, they get a micro-credential, certificate of completion. We also have some badges available. The badges are very similar to these full pathways, except they're smaller, and they're around some really in need of skills, like being competent in Alexa or gaming or IoT, and to be literate in the cloud. Those credentials then show up on their portfolio once they obtain them.
Yeah, and so the projects that students would do, are they hands-on AWS projects, or what are those like?
Yeah, almost all of the projects require you to go into AWS to actually experience the management console, to experience the starter accounts environment, and do hands-on work, and then showcase your work in that project submission.
Great.
So let's hop over to you. Can we first go in and give me an overview of an AWS account and the starter account?
Sure. So let's start with the starter account. So from the starter account, I'm in my portal login, right? I'm in the Educate portal, and I'm going to go over here on the top right where it says AWS account. So then I'm going to click here, and this will actually take me to a different web page. And so after this signs in, it's going to show me some info. So it's going to show me my account status, so what kind of access I have to my AWS account, how many credits I have left. So basically this determines like what kind of stuff I can spin up in AWS, how many days are left on my account, so it looks like by default it's for a year, and the session time, so basically when I would have to re-sign into this. And so what I would do here is, once I'm here, if I want to get into the AWS Management Console, I would just click on this link, AWS Management Console, and it would just bring me to the console here. Ken, do you want to tell us some of the differences between a starter account and a regular AWS account? Are there any limitations?
Sure. As we mentioned, one of the basic differences is you don't need a credit card for doing a starter account. You need one for doing an AWS account. There are some limitations. Generally, we provide fewer, less dollar amount of resources. Like I said, if you use that Twitch 2018 code, you're actually going to get the same $100 worth of access in AWS or in the starter account. But you do have some limitations around the instance type, how big that instance is, the amount of CPU that is in that instance. So there will be some instance types that we do not allow, some type of services that we do not allow. The vast majority are usable. Additionally, I think the last thing is it's not portable.
Right.
You can't switch, you can't take that account with you after you leave AWS Educate. And by the way, you can't switch from an AWS Educate starter account to a real account yet. We are working on that potential.
So that actually brings me into, so the other type of account is if you have a regular AWS account. So to set up a regular AWS account, what you do is you go to aws.amazon.com, and you'll have this link in the top right corner here that says create an AWS account. So you would click on that link, and then you get put into a form. So in this form, you type in your email address. So here's an email that I have. You type in a password, and let me just type that in again. And then you type in an AWS account name. So that's just an alias for your account. So I'm going to say Leo's AWS testing account. And you can change the account name later, so that's not a big deal. So then you would hit continue. After you hit continue, you get taken to a different form where you put in some more of your contact info. So you put it whether this is a business account or a personal account. You put in your address and all that stuff, and then you put in your credit card. So you do need a credit card for this for the regular AWS account. Then you just verify your identity through a phone call, and then you have an AWS account, and you can jump into this console here, and you can start using AWS usually within minutes.
Fantastic. And this, by the way, is much of the bridge between being AWS Educate and building this static website. You're going to need to have access into AWS to build a static website.
Yeah.
So now let's walk into S3 and storage services. Can you give a quick overview of the type of storage services that are available at Amazon?
So first of all, there's S3. So S3 is the simple storage service. And S3 is used for a bunch of different things. It's actually at the core of a lot of use cases for AWS. But the thing we're going to use it for today is for static websites. So what that means is you can have a website that consists of things like HTML code, JavaScript, CSS files. And so if there's any kind of processing, like actual computing going on, it's going to happen in the JavaScript on your web browser, not on some server remotely, right? And so that is a static website. And we actually made a bunch of these when I used to work at the Obama campaign. So we had a lot of websites that were good for like a day for a specific issue, and we didn't want to do a full server setup for them. And most of them weren't going to get a lot of traffic, but some of them did. So we would just set up an S3 bucket, put the website in there, and one of the nice things is a static site on S3 can scale. It can take a lot of traffic without you having to do too much setup. It doesn't cost a lot, so you're paying for storage. So you pay only for what you use for storage. And then you're paying for bandwidth, so how much bandwidth it consumes. And you're going to pay for that whether it's on EC2 or S3. So it's efficient, it's cost efficient, and it scales. So it's great for that. Another thing that a lot of customers use AWS or S3 for is data lakes. So they store their...
What's a data lake?
Yeah, so data lake is when you store data such as logs or some kind of data that, like on how your users are using your website, and then you run software on top of that data lake to analyze it. So to figure out like what, if you're interested in this product that we sell, what's another product that we can sell, or how are users clicking around on my website? How can I optimize that? So there's a bunch of different services that you can put on top of S3 that read your data that's in S3. So there's EMR, which is Elastic MapReduce. And so that's basically software that allows you to take really large data sets and analyze them. And there's other services as well that let you just run SQL queries on top of it, S3. You can do data warehousing, all kinds of stuff like that.
I would say big data analytics, and obviously we're hearing about this all the time. Hadoop has also been one of those terms that's been in one of the top 10 LinkedIn terms. So the more analytics, data science, it's just become so large.
Yeah, and just to give you an example from a customer that does this, so Airbnb, I'm sure most of you know or have used Airbnb. They use S3 to store 10 terabytes of static files, including user pictures. So basically, when you go on Airbnb and you look at your user profile, that's being stored in S3. And they also use it to store backups, which is actually another use case of S3. Like it's really easy to store your backups. And in fact, my laptop here, I have a program that just stores a backup of my laptop on S3.
Great. Actually, there's one of my favorite use cases just because I like to be outdoors. So Under Armour has a connected fitness app. Over 180 million users use this app. And largely what they're doing is they're doing their running, they're doing hiking and trekking, and they're storing that information. The information and the data that's being collected, who they are, who their friends are, all being stored within S3. Again, terabytes of data that can be served up when you want to access that service at in real time.
Yeah, and another nice thing about that is so when you store data like that in data lake, you're paying for the storage of the data, but if you want to do some kind of analytics and spin up a data warehouse or an EMR cluster again, you're only paying for the compute time when you spin it up. So you could spin it up, do your analytics, shut it down. And so you've only paid for a few hours instead of having, paying for the data and the computer.
Great, and really importantly, again, we're going to be talking about building a static website. It's important to know all the things that can be done on top of these websites. It's not just the things that Leo's going to be demonstrating today. These are the building blocks of so many things to come.
Yeah, so another trend that's become really popular is something called serverless computing, right? So what that means is traditionally, when you spin up like a WordPress or Drupal or a content management system like that, you need web servers, you need load balancers, you need a relational database, and you have to figure out how do you scale all three of those things. And so that a lot of people still do that, but just a lot more complicated. And we'll actually be talking about how to do that in a later episode, right?
Great.
But,
I want to make sure that you just do a quick overview of a couple of the other storage services so that we've got the good array painted.
So we've got S3. And then we've got EBS. So EBS is the elastic block storage. So EBS is basically like the hard drive on my laptop, right? So if I have a virtual server, I need storage on that virtual server that's persistent. So it's basically if I shut the server down, I still want that storage to be there. So that's an EBS volume. So on a EC2 instance, which is a virtual server, you can mount one or more EBS volumes. There's different types of volumes. So there's general purpose volumes, which have SSDs. There's one that have magnetic drives. There's maximum throughput. So there's different, and they're just for different performance characteristics, right?
Okay.
And different use cases. And so I have a server and I want to mount a volume on it or multiple volumes, that's EBS. Then we have EFS. So EFS is Elastic File System, and so that's a shared file system. So for example, if I have a content management system like Drupal or WordPress, I might have a function that where the people who are writing the articles on my Drupal or WordPress, they're uploading files like a picture or a CSS file or something, and because I have multiple web servers, I need to access the same folder from multiple servers. So that's a use case where I would use EFS. And then lastly, we also have Glacier. So Glacier is for long-term archival storage. So basically, if the way I think of it, now coming from working in data centers before, is if it's something that you would put on tape for tape backup, put it on Glacier instead. So Glacier, it takes a little bit longer to get your data back. It's not immediate from when you put into Glacier, but it is built, is engineered for the same 11 nines of durability as S3, and it's a lot less expensive, and it lets you know and feel safe that your data is being stored somewhere. And in some cases, you have to legally prove that you are storing your data. For example, if you have a healthcare-based application, you have to prove, I'm saving this data for 5 years or 10 years, but you're probably never going to access that.
Right. So really, cold storage that you do not need in it immediate, but you need the permanence of that.
Yeah.
So we've been talking, right now about started in that demand for cloud jobs. We gave you an overview of AWS Educate and also promo code Twitch 2018 that they can use for benefits to get some more benefits. Now we did an overview of S3 and other storage systems. And right now we're going to go into the demo. This is this is the heart. And also in future episodes, I believe our next episode is on September 13th. We're going to go into making that site more robust. Leo's going to do that right now. The one thing I would say is if you have any questions, feel free to shoot questions and we'll be answering them as we go. So Leo, let's hop into that demo.
Okay, great. So if we're showing my screen here, this is the AWS web console, right? So again, when I sign into an AWS account, this is what I see. And this is just a listing of all of our services. And so there's a lot of stuff here. What we're interested in today is S3. So we can either just go to S3 right here, or we can just type in on the top here, we can type in S3, which is usually what I do. And so this takes us into the S3 console, right? And so I already have part of this set up here, so I'll show you what the end result is. So the end result of our site is going to be this snake game. And so again, this is just a few HTML files and a CSS file and JavaScript file. And the way it works, I used to play this type of game when I was a kid. This is blue thing's a snake. And I'm just gonna, every time it eats, I'm guessing those are mice, the snake gets longer and becomes harder because if the snake loops around itself, you lose. If you hit a wall, you lose.
Can you get this one? I was just gonna say I wanted to see if you were quick enough to be able to get that red dot.
I was not. But
Have to play up.
yeah, so and the code for this is actually on GitHub. I've made a shortcut to it. I'll display it again later, but it's awssa.net/snake, and it takes you to this GitHub repository, and it's open source, so you can just download it and try it yourself. But basically, so again, if we look here, there's CSS, JavaScript, and an index.html. So what we want to do, the first thing we want to do is we want to create an S3 bucket. So the bucket, you can think of it as a folder, and we're going to create it with a name that we can then make into a much shorter name for a better URL. So I'm going to call it snakes dot, and then just a domain that I own, awssa.net. And I'm just I could go through, there's a bunch of options you can go through afterwards. So you can turn on versioning, so that means that when I overwrite my files, it saves the old version. I can log my requests, so I can see, if I turn that on, I can see exactly how many people have used this website and when. You can tag it, so if you want to see later for cost, like what in my AWS account costs how much, I can look at that based on tags. You can encrypt things automatically here, so if you need to do encryption at rest of your data, as some of our customers do, you can enable that. And then you go and set the permissions. So this is really important. So by default, when you make a new S3 bucket, when you upload things to S3, everything is private by default. So what that means is if I just upload it here and I tried to get to it without logging in from the internet, I wouldn't be able to get into it, right? So if you choose to make something public, that's the choice that you make, and you have to knowingly make, right? We're not just going to make it public for you by default.
There's so many things that this is really important. It's not just S3, it's your whole account. It's managing your keys and making sure that you protect them. There are nefarious, there are people out there who are going to do the wrong things with your information if you are not careful.
Yeah, and I'm not going to get into too much depth here, but with all of our services, we make it so that it's everything's set up with, it's called the least privilege principle. So basically, everything is private by default unless you make it public. So for example, when you spin up a new virtual server in EC2 instance, like the inbound ports so you can remotely access them are closed by default. So you have to go ahead and open them. And that's for your safety. And so you only open up what you need to open up. So anyway, I haven't changed anything here. I've just named my bucket, and I have all default settings, and I'm going to hit create bucket. So I created this bucket now, and see it says not public. The one that I already had set up was public, and obviously because I'm hosting a website here, I do actually want this bucket to be public. But we make it really easy. It says there's a thing here that says how many total public buckets you have, and you can click it to view all of your public buckets, and here as well. So when you go into the console, you know like what's private and what's public. So I've got this folder here, and now I want to upload the actual files into the folder. So I'm going to go here. Everything that I'm doing, by the way, you can do through our APIs, through our SDKs, or through the command line interface. So when I work, in my normal job, I usually use our command line interface because it's more efficient. But just to demonstrate how to do this, and to more easily visualize it, I'm using the web console.
SDK, software development kit.
API is a programmatic interface. So I'm going to go to my desktop where I have the files for this, and I'm going to upload everything. So first I'm going to upload my index.html file. So this is just the default file here. So I'm going to hit upload. So it's uploaded. So that was easy. Then I need to actually create the folders. So the CSS folder. So I'm going to click on create folder here. I'm going to give it a name, CSS. I'm not going to change any of this. I'm going to hit save. So now I've created a CSS folder. Then I'm going to create a JavaScript folder. And I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm just creating a new folder, hitting JS. And so now I need to upload the files into those folders. So I'm going to go into my CSS folder. I'm going to hit upload. I'm going to go to my CSS folder here and upload the CSS file. So that's it. And then I'm going to go to my JavaScript folder again and upload the JavaScript file. All right, so now that that's done, so all the folders are in place, and if I did this with a command line interface, I could do this with one command. There's like a sync command, and it would just upload everything. Okay, I've got these files. So now how do this is still private. This is still a private bucket. It's not actually hosting a website. So I need to do a few things here. So the first thing I need to do is I need to enable this bucket for static website hosting. And so I'm going to go to properties here, and there's a tab called static website hosting. I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to hit enable. So, and then once I hit use this bucket to host an S3 website, all you have to do is just type in the index file. So when you go to the URL, what file does it go to by default? So this is going to be just index.html. And then when there's like an error, like a file not found, where is it going to go by default? So we don't have an error.html, but I'm going to make that the default file. And you could do some more complicated redirection rules here. I'm not going to do any of that right now. So I've now enabled the folder, but it's still a private bucket. So it's enabled for hosting, but still a private bucket. So to make it a public bucket, I need to set this thing up called a bucket policy. So instead of just manually going into each of the files I uploaded and setting them to public, I'm going to set up this bucket policy that just marks the whole folder public, which is okay.
So it goes against everything that's contained in that bucket will have the exact same policy.
Yeah, so to do that, you go to permissions, and then you go to bucket policy, and then you get this editor here. So let me just jump to my, I have a file editor here. So this is, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so you can see it. So this is my bucket policy here. So actually, I need to change it because it was for my other bucket. So basically, this is a piece of JSON. And so what it's doing is it is allowing, so we have an effect allow, is allowing the S3 get object API call on everything in this resource. So this is the ARN, so this is basically the identifier of that bucket. So now, because this is not the right actual identifier, I'm going to change it to the bucket I just made. So that, now it's right. So it's saying anytime anyone tries to get an object, so download an object from this bucket, they're allowed.
Okay.
So I'm going to copy this from here into here. Oh, let's see here. There we go. I'm going to hit save. It's going to validate my policy. And so as soon as I did that, see, it now shows this bucket has public access.
Okay.
So it warns you that you've just made this a public bucket. So that's basically it. So what I need to do is now just to get the URL of the bucket. So you go to back to properties, back to static site hosting, and this is the endpoint here. So this is how you access this bucket. So let's click on it and see what happens. Yep, so I'm back to my snake game.
Ah,
so
fantastic.
It works, and you can send anybody this URL now, and it'll work. Now, one thing we want to do here is this URL is not very user-friendly. It is a long URL. You know, you're not going to remember it. So one thing I might want to do is basically make a DNS record that's a much shorter name. And so I actually, again, I made this bucket snakes.awssa.net. That is the domain that I own. So what I could do if I wanted to is I can go to our service called Route 53. So again, I'm going to go to the services tab here and type in Route 53.
Right, you can do that by either typing in or browsing through the various services.
Yep, and I'm going to go to DNS management here. And I already have this set up in another account, but I'll just show you how to do it really quickly. So you click Create Hosted Zone. So you type in a domain name. So my domain is awssa.net. You can do a public or a private zone. This is a public zone. And once I have that, these are my DNS records. So what I want to do is I want snakes.awssa.net to just go to that S3 bucket. So I have the name of the bucket in my clipboard. So what I need to do is basically set up a DNS record for that. So it's a type CNAME, that's just basically a shortcut. And I'm going to type in snakes here. So snakes.awssa.net. And it's going to go to, I had my bucket policy in here. So let me actually go back and get the name of my S3 bucket. So it's this, right? I'm going to go here and I'm going to type that in, except I don't need the HTTP or anything. I just need the DNS name. And I'm going to hit create. And that's it. And so assuming I had this zone hooked up to my actual DNS records, like with my domain registrar, when I went to snakes.awssa.net, it would just go straight to this bucket. So now I have a friendly URL.
Fantastic.
So that's really, that's all it takes to set up a static website.
Great, so now we did the static website. We actually, here, you use Route 53 to make the website an easier name. And it sets the premise for the basic things that you can do. Again, we talked about what Under Armour and what Airbnb, Pinterest has a giant use of S3 where they use S3 to store all of the images, the files that are saved by their users, with many, many terabytes of data, and they use that information, the data that they're stored, to in essence, rewrite their search on a daily basis and make their search as updated as possible. So just huge amounts of usage for S3. I think it's hard to imagine any of AWS customers not using.
Yeah, I think
the
every
storage
customer that I've
service.
ever worked with uses S3 in some way, shape, or form.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, so this was your introduction into static websites. I think next week we're going to get into Cloud9.
Yep.
Setting up architectural diagrams, using Lambda.
Yeah.
Want to give a quick overview and a preview of what we're going to be doing on September 13th?
Yeah. So at the next episode, we're going to talk about architecture diagrams. So an architecture diagram, basically, a lot of times when I meet with customers, we draw out kind of what they want to set up. So we draw the the network, how if they have load balancers, web servers, databases, anything else, and you draw it out so you figure out what services do we use here, how does the data flow. So basically, in a work environment, it's how you used to actually set up the system before you start going into the web console or just into AWS and actually spinning things up.
Fantastic.
And then we're going to talk about Lambda. So Lambda is our serverless compute service. So one way to expand this website, for example, would be to add like a leaderboard or login page, right? And so to do either of those things, you need to actually have logic that you have to store data somewhere. You have to keep track of who has the highest scores and what the usernames and passwords are. So you could use Lambda for that. So Lambda means it's a service where you take a piece of code. So that could be JavaScript, it could be Python, it could be .NET. So there's different languages supported with it. And instead of setting it up on a full web server with the full application stack on it, you just copy and paste the Lambda function into the Lambda service and execute it whenever you need to. So you can have something on this website, for example, trigger that execution and get the data back. And so the nice thing about that is there's little setup. You pay for what you use, so it's down to, I believe, the 100 milliseconds. So you pay per 100 millisecond of execution time. So it's very granular, and it's easier to scale. And it's also built across multiple data centers by default, so it's built to be highly available. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about Cloud9. And actually, I love Cloud9. I use it a lot.
Too.
So Cloud9 is an IDE, so that's an integrated development environment. And with Cloud9, basically, through my web browser, I can access a full IDE, which has a built-in command line interface to AWS. It has built-in integrations with Lambda, with some of our other services. And I could have like a really inexpensive, basic old laptop. As long as it has a web browser, I can use Cloud9. And I can also use it from anywhere in the world that I can configure my Cloud9 to accept connections from, which is super
Fantastic.
nice.
We've actually added Cloud9 into some of our developing environments inside AWS Educate, and we're finding that teachers, for their classroom environment, are using that more and more. So we're excited about that. It was a great integration that was done with AWS did with the Cloud9 team.
And it looks like we have some questions.
Yeah. So I was just going to get to that. So first question comes from Zumotz, Z-U-M-O-T-Z. What type of web server does S3 use? Apache, Nginx?
Nginx. So the nice thing about S3 is that it's a fully managed service. So you don't have to configure a web server. It's all built with our technology. So you just upload the files, and there's some customizations in there, like you can set up redirect rules and such. But you don't really have to, set up a full web server. If you do want to do that, if you want to set up Apache or Nginx or IIS, then you can spin up an EC2 instance and configure any of those products however you want them to.
Great. From Patrix 252, Patrix 252, is it possible to sync the bucket, the S3 bucket, with a GitHub repository?
So that's a great question. So yes, it is possible to do that. There's several ways to do it. If what you want to do is go from GitHub to S3, so every time you commit to like the main branch of your GitHub repo, you want to go to S3, you can set up. There's basically a post commit hook in GitHub or in Git in general, and you'd have to write some code that just commits it to S3. There's other GitHub hooks actually for things like code deploy as well, which is one of our other services. If you want to go from S3 to GitHub, that's actually a great use case for a Lambda. So the way that that works is Lambda is integrated with S3. So anytime you add an object to S3, so let's say you upload a file to S3, you can set up event notifications. So it'll trigger Lambda. So let's say you upload a file to your S3 bucket. That triggers the Lambda function. The Lambda function contains some code that you write that basically tells it, hey, take this file and commit it to my GitHub repository. So you'd have to write a little bit of code, but you could do it.
Okay. From Super Game Maker, does C9 work in an iPad?
So does Cloud9 work in an iPad? Yeah, I believe so. I haven't tried it myself, but it works.
As long as you
can get
access a
Chrome
browser.
or Safari on an iPad, so
Right.
it should work just fine. You probably want to have a physical keyboard to make it easier to use, but yeah.
Great. And my last question from you is Star Trek or Star Wars?
I am a big Star Trek fan, actually. I mean, I respect Star Wars, but I've seen like every episode of every series of Star Trek several times.
What's the? I mean, you're gonna have to dive a little deeper. What's the main rationale for your preference?
Star Trek is just I would say Star Wars is like space opera, whereas Star Trek is actual real science fiction, and there's a lot more depth in the stories, and there's just a lot more episodes and things to watch, and so that I think the character is a lot more well developed. So I'm personally a big Star Trek fan.
So you're not an opera fan. It was space opera was just a fantastic. Actually, a couple. First of all, you got. I love this one from Banhawy, Banhawy. I love Leo's jacket. Need a link to that. Can you share them?
Sure.
I don't know if we're allowed. This is not a product endorsement.
Yeah. The jacket's from Suit Supply, and I can send you a link to it. We'll share it after the fact.
He's a very well dressed, well coiffed individual. What's from J Baltazar, JBALTAZAR03? What's the difference between EC2 and S3 when deploying a static site?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So the difference is, as I showed you, with S3, all the setup that's involved is, you enable the bucket for to host files, you set up the bucket policy, and you upload the files. That's it. And then and this actually happened to me when I used to work at the Obama campaign. We set up one of these microsites, and I went to sleep, and the next morning I woke up, and that microsite was like #1 on Reddit. It was getting tens of thousands of concurrent users at the same time. And the setup I did was what I just showed you, right? So we just uploaded some files into an S3 bucket, and it worked great. I got an alert that there's a lot of traffic, not that something was down.
Was that a CloudWatch alarm, by the way?
I think it was. We had like some kind of traffic analytics on it. But yeah, so if you set up a static hosting on on EC2 instances, so there's different types of EC2 instances in all different kinds of sizes. So there's like a T2 micro, and then on the big end we have like an X1.32XL, and that instance has like 2 terabytes of RAM and like over 80 vCPUs, and there's everything in between as well.
Yeah, we have a bunch of different instance families that are generally determined by that first letter, and then different groupings, different instance types within that family.
And each of them has different capacities, right? They have different amounts of CPU and memory and network cards. And so when you set up a static site, you have to think about like, well, how much traffic can this support on let's say T2 micro instance or a bigger instance, and that's all going to play into how much cost. So you don't want to over provision, like get an instance that's too big where it's not used, but you don't want to under provision. You get an instance that's too small that's going to crash when you get hit with traffic. So we have things around that. You can set up auto scaling. You can set up a load balancer to distribute traffic across multiple instances. You can do load testing ahead of time to make sure that your auto scaling and everything works. But it's a lot more complicated than just uploading a file to an S3 bucket. So we have a lot of customers that do that for various reasons, and that's fine, but just a lot more involved. And it also costs more money, right? So the instances, it's now on per second pricing, so you pay per second. But let's say you have like 3 instances that are on. And the load balancer, you're paying for the load balancer, you're paying for the instances, you're paying for the EBS volumes on those instances. So you have to make sure that that's all properly configured and you turn it off when you're not using it. With an S3 bucket, you're just paying for the traffic, which you're going to pay for with EC2 or S3, and you're paying for the storage. And that's it. So it's probably going to be a lot less expensive and a lot simpler.
Great. All right, we have another question from the viewer who wants your jacket. I already have my static website on S3. Wants to migrate code to code commit, and whenever I push to it, it would update the S3, update S3 and the website.
Yeah. So to summarize the question, what you're trying to do is you have your code and code commits. It's a Git repository and code commit. Anytime you make a change, you want that change to be automatically deployed to an S3 bucket. So yes, you can do that. So you would do code commit. And there's a few ways to do that. This is how I would do it. There's a service that we have called Code Pipeline. So Code Pipeline basically is going to check your code commit repository for changes. So anytime there's a change, what it can then do is it can either trigger a Lambda function, and that Lambda function is just going to say, okay, take everything from this S3 bucket or from this code commit repo and publish it to this S3 bucket. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is you can have code build. So code build is a service where it spins up a Docker container temporarily, and it runs whatever commands you want it to run inside that Docker container, then it stops. So we have people that use this to like build Docker containers to do unit testing on their code. But what I would do here is I would have a Docker container with our command line interface. I would have it spun up by code build, and I would have it use our command line interface to, basically it's triggered by code commit, and it just takes that, it's going to connect to that code commit repository, it's going to check out the code, and it's going to upload it to your S3 bucket, and then it's going to shut down, and then it'll be done. So basically you have this pipeline where every time there's a change that happens, it's going to get sent to your S3 bucket.
Great, great. All right, I'm going to do a quick review of what we did today, and we'll preview the next, re-preview the next episode. So we started off by walking through AWS Educate, why there's this massive demand for cloud jobs. We went into some of the details around that, great paying jobs in a whole slew of fields, and companies like Amazon, our customers and partners that are actively recruiting. Leo then went into our storage services, highlighting especially the Amazon Simple Storage Service, or S3, which was used as the basis to develop this static website that he developed today. We talked about how customers such as Airbnb, Pinterest, and Under Armour, as well as the Obama campaign, were using S3 and set the stage for the next level of development in building up top of the non-static websites. We're going to talk about Cloud9, Lambda, architectural diagrams, and other things next Thursday when we come back to you with AWS Educate on Twitch at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Central. We really appreciate this time. We love talking with the Twitch audience. We hope to motivate students and educators around the world to get deeper into AWS and to do some of the hands-on things that Leo is doing today. Thank you so much for joining, and we look forward to seeing you again.